He's known for his goals, his discipline, and his quiet nature. But one night, Cristiano Ronaldo received a message that had nothing to do with football. It came from someone he barely knew, and it led to a conversation that would change everything. Before we begin, let us know where you're watching from tonight. It's always great to see how far these stories travel. On a crisp autumn evening in Manchester, the sky was overcast, and the city hadn't yet turned on its lights. In a converted museum, space filled with laughter, crystal glasses, and polite claps, David Beckham smiled just enough to avoid suspicion. The event was a charity dinner, with footballers, celebrities, and politicians all in attendance. For a moment, Beckham was part of the crowd, but there was something off about him. His gaze drifted, his answers came slowly, and after less than an hour, he quietly excused himself. In the back of a dark vehicle with tinted windows, he sat alone, staring at his phone. He opened his contacts, hesitated, and then typed, "Cristiano, I need to talk. Just you and me." He hit send, turned off the screen, and leaned back. There were no guards, no chatter, just the hum of tires on wet asphalt. 2 hours away in Manchester, Cristiano Ronaldo was at home, finishing dinner with his family. The message popped up as he reached for his drink. He read it twice, then showed it to his wife. She raised an eyebrow, reading between the lines. If Beckham was reaching out, it must be serious. Ronaldo, ever the quiet one, didn't say much. He stood, grabbed a jacket, and quietly left the house. No entourage, just him and his car keys. 2 hours later, they met in a modest meeting room at a quiet hotel on the edge of the city, chosen specifically for its discretion. Beckham looked older than the version the world knew. Tired, worn, but he greeted Ronaldo with a nod, not a handshake, and gestured for him to sit. Neither of them spoke at first. The silence wasn't awkward. It was necessary. Eventually, Beckham broke it. "Thanks for coming," he said. "I know this is strange." Ronaldo simply shrugged. "Not everything has to make sense," he replied, his voice calm but steady. That seemed to relax Beckham just a little. He leaned forward, elbows on the table. "I'm thinking of leaving her," he said, his voice low but certain. Ronaldo blinked but didn't respond. He waited, letting Beckham find his words. "Victoria," Beckham added, almost unnecessarily. "It's been coming for a while, but I thought maybe someone like you would understand." Ronaldo raised an eyebrow, his gaze steady. "Why me?" he asked softly. Beckham gave a half smile, more bitter than amused. "Because you've been with the same woman for years. Quiet, no drama, no scandals. You live like the rest of us pretend to." Ronaldo didn't correct him. He didn't explain that his own life had its fair share of challenges, just that they were less public. Instead, he let the silence stretch again, giving Beckham the space he needed. "I don't know what happened," Beckham continued. "We became something else. The brand, the image. We talk through assistants now. We live on opposite floors. I walk past her in the hallway, and I feel like a guest." Ronaldo listened, his expression unreadable. Beckham's words hung in the air, raw and vulnerable. "I've tried," Beckham said, his voice thickening. "God knows I've tried. But I don't know who we are anymore, and I'm tired of pretending." There it was, the truth behind the public persona. Not betrayal, not scandal, but to people drifting apart, quietly and slowly. Ronaldo shifted in his seat, his eyes thoughtful, before he finally spoke. "You know," he began, "once, during my first season at Sporting Lisbon, I came home, late from training. I was exhausted. We'd just lost a match. I didn't say anything. My wife had made dinner, and I just sat down to eat." He paused, his tone reflecting a quiet pain. "She didn't say anything either," Ronaldo continued. "She just got up, cleared the plate, and went upstairs." Beckham looked at him, his curiosity piqued. "What did you do?" "I finished eating. Then I cleaned her plate," Ronaldo replied simply. "And then I went upstairs and asked her what we'd become." She didn't respond, but she looked at me like I was a stranger. That was enough. There was a long silence between them, each man reflecting on his own experiences. Ronaldo's words lingered in the room, echoing softly. Beckham leaned back, his gaze now fixed on the window, as though searching for an answer outside. Beckham's voice broke the silence again, soft but heavy. "I don't want to lose her," he said, his eyes distant. "But I don't know if I can find her again." Ronaldo didn't rush to offer answers. Instead, he let the weight of the question settle in the room, feeling the quiet between them. There were no easy fixes here, no quick solutions, just two men at different points in their lives, both grappling with the same kind of loss. Finally, Ronaldo spoke, his words slow but deliberate. "You don't have to find her," he said. "You just have to show up where you left her. See if she's still there." The words weren't rehearsed. They came out like a quiet realization, a simple truth. Beckham didn't speak for a long moment. He just nodded once, as though accepting something he wasn't sure he was ready to face. They left the hotel separately. No photographs, no press, no sign of the conversation that had just transpired between them. But something had shifted. That was only the beginning. The next morning in Manchester, the city seemed unusually still. Grey clouds hung low over the rooftops, and the energy of early commuters felt sluggish, distracted. In a quiet hotel not far from the River Irwell, a member of the cleaning staff passed by one of the meeting rooms and stopped. The chairs were left slightly out of place. The teacups were untouched. No sign of who had sat there, just silence. David Beckham had already checked out. Cristiano Ronaldo had left even earlier. Neither of them had slept much. Back in Manchester, Beckham sat in his private office, the walls lined with trophies, framed, photos, and magazine covers. But none of it looked back at him. None of it could help him now. He was staring at a blank piece of paper, pen in hand, trying to write something, a list, a letter, a sentence. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, he reached for his phone and opened the message from Ronaldo again. It was still there. One simple line: "Don't confuse distance with absence." It hit him harder than he expected. Victoria had left for a shoot that morning before dawn. She hadn't said goodbye, but that wasn't unusual. Still, it stung more than usual. He stood up, walked to the window, and watched a neighbor walking their dog. Ordinary things, normal life, and yet he wondered when he had stopped participating in it. Without thinking, he opened his phone again. This time, he typed, "Dinner tonight, just us." He stared at the message for a full minute before hitting send. That evening, Beckham and Victoria sat across from each other in a quiet corner of their home. The table was set, the staff had served, and wine had been poured. But the conversation hadn't started. Victoria looked down at her food, and after a long pause, she finally broke the silence. "This feels forced," she said quietly. Beckham didn't disagree, but he didn't shy away from the truth either. "Maybe," he said softly, "but that doesn't mean it's wrong." Victoria sighed, leaning back. "What are we doing, David? Honestly?" For the first time in a long while, Beckham didn't try to offer a polished answer. He didn't put on a mask. He simply looked at her and said, "I don't know, but No, I don't want to lose you without trying." She looked at him for a long time, not angry, but searching. Then, quietly, she asked, "What changed?" He thought of Ronaldo, of the quiet hotel room, of the line that had echoed in his mind. "All day, I remembered who I was when we started," he said slowly, "and I realized I'd let that man get lost somewhere along the way." Victoria didn't respond immediately. She just studied him for a moment, and then softly said, "I miss him." "That version of you?" Beckham nodded, his throat tight. "I do too." They didn't finish their plates. They didn't solve everything that night. But for the first time in months, they stayed at the table after the meal, just sitting, not talking, but not leaving either. 2 days later, Beckham stood in the kitchen, and Victoria walked in holding her phone. "Brooklyn wants us at his match this weekend," she said. Looking up, said, "He hasn't seen us both on the sidelines in ages." David nodded slowly. "Then let's go." He didn't suggest calling the press. No Instagram posts. Just a quiet decision to show up. That night, while brushing his teeth, Beckham glanced at his reflection in the mirror. There was something different, not younger, not happier, just more present, less blurred. Meanwhile, in Liverpool, Cristiano Ronaldo was jogging through Sefton Park before breakfast, a quiet ritual that helped him center himself for the day. No one approached him. Most people were too polite, too British to do more than glance. As he rounded a curve near the pond, he saw a father holding his toddler, pointing at the ducks. The child clapped in delight. Ronaldo smiled not because it was extraordinary, but because it wasn't. It was just simple, everyday life. The kind of thing he'd forgotten to appreciate amidst all the noise. When he got home, he checked his phone. There was a new message from Beckham. "I'm not sure I'm doing it right, but I'm trying." Ronaldo's fingers hovered over the screen. He thought for a moment, then typed a reply. "That counts, right?" Minutes later, Beckham responded, "It's the only thing that counts." There was no need for more, no follow-up, no big plans. Just quiet support. The kind of support that wasn't meant for applause, but for something deeper, something unspoken. Beckham began to cancel things. Not the big ones, just the unnecessary ones. Events he didn't care about. Meetings he had only agreed to out of habit. He stopped letting his schedule control his life. It went unnoticed by most, and that, in itself, was a relief. There was no dramatic transformation, no grand gestures, but gradually, the silence in the house began to change. The tone shifted, less avoidance. More pause. Victoria would pass Beckham in the hallway, and instead of brushing past him like strangers, she'd actually stop. They'd speak, sometimes about nothing more than what to have for dinner. But it was more than they'd said to each other in a long time. Brooklyn's match came. They stood side by side, said little, cheered once. It was enough. Back in his London office, Beckham sat across from a blank page he had been staring at for days. Not a speech, not a post, just 3 words at the top. Start showing up. He meant it. Rain swept across the pavement outside as he finally wrote something down, his mind still lingering on Ronaldo's words from the night in the hotel room. Don't confuse distance with absence. Meanwhile, in Liverpool, Ronaldo was sitting quietly in his kitchen, hands wrapped around a warm cup of mint tea. His daughters were upstairs, and his wife was folding laundry in the living room. The house was quiet, suspended in a rare moment of calm. His phone buzzed once. It was another message from Beckham. Do you ever feel like football took too much from you? The message read. Ronaldo didn't reply right away. The question struck too close to something he hadn't touched in years. Instead, he sat there, letting the steam from his tea rise into the air. After a few moments, he finally typed back, "Yes, once. Years ago, the city was Rome." The reply came almost instantly. "I think I've already lost pieces. I just don't know how many." Ronaldo hesitated before typing his final response. Then start with one. One moment, one dinner, one apology, and build from there. Later, that week, Beckham cancelled a televised appearance. Just one. Nothing massive. But instead of attending, he stayed home. Victoria came into the kitchen and glanced at him. "I thought you had that thing tonight," she asked. He simply shrugged. "I did. I chose this instead." She didn't smile, didn't rush to hug him. But she didn't walk away either. She stayed in the room, and they made dinner together. At first, it was awkward. He forgot where things were. Burned the garlic, but she laughed. And he laughed too. Something cracked open between them. Not all the way, but enough. In Liverpool, Ronaldo spent the evening watching a film with his daughters, something animated and overly colorful. They laughed at a silly scene, and one of them leaned against him, warm and unbothered. It was a quiet kind of happiness, simple and genuine. He thought back to the apartment in Rome, the sound of the door closing when his wife left, the weight of the silence, heavier than any stadium he had ever played in. Football had nearly taken everything from him, but now, in this moment, he had pulled it all back. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. Later, Beckham took Harper to school for the first time in months. On the way back, she said something simple. "Mom was happy this morning," she said. Almost as an afterthought. David didn't say anything. At first, He just looked out the window as the trees passed by. In that moment, he didn't feel like a global icon or a businessman. He didn't feel like he had it all figured out. He just felt like a man who had nearly lost everything and was now being shown how to begin again. 2 days later, in his private office, Beckham was staring out the window. The sun was shining through the clouds, the kind of light that makes everything look possible. His phone buzzed with a message from Ronaldo. "Do you think people like us ever go back to normal?" Beckham had asked. Ronaldo replied minutes later, "There's no normal. There's only choosing again. Every day." That night, after dinner, Beckham helped clear the table. The kids had already gone upstairs, and the kitchen was filled with the soft hum of the dishwasher and the lingering smell of garlic and herbs. Victoria handed him a glass, and as their hands touched, she paused. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For what?" Beckham asked, his voice soft. "For not giving up on me," she replied. He almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because the words felt too familiar. He had said them to himself in that quiet hotel room in Manchester just 2 weeks ago. Instead of replying with a speech, Beckham simply nodded, set the glass down, and pulled her gently into a hug. This time, she didn't pull away. In Liverpool, Ronaldo sat on the edge of his daughter's bed while she drifted off to sleep. "Did you always know you'd marry Mommy?" she asked quietly, her voice small and soft. Ronaldo smiled. "No, but I always knew I didn't want to be without her." The little girl nodded, satisfied, and her eyes closed again. Ronaldo stayed there for a while, watching her sleep. The simplicity of it all, the peace, was a reminder of what truly mattered. He thought again of Beckham, of that conversation, the one that no one else saw, the conversation that had shifted everything. On Sunday morning, the newspapers covered Beckham's foundation, a new charity partnership, and a public appearance he had planned for the following month. None of the headlines mentioned the dinner he had skipped or the quiet walk he took with Victoria. None of them spoke of the breakfast where she smiled at him for the first time in months. And that was fine. Not everything needed to be seen. Some things mattered more when they weren't posted, when they weren't filmed. Spring came early that year. It wasn't dramatic. It was just the kind of spring that brought enough warmth to loosen coats and encourage people to step outside into their gardens. Life kept moving, new transfers, sponsorship deals, tabloid whispers, but behind it all, to homes in England felt quieter, steadier, and changed. In London, Beckham stood on the balcony outside his bedroom, tea in hand, watching Victoria laugh at something Harper had said. He didn't join the conversation. He just observed fully there, fully still. He had started showing up in small ways, and slowly. The house had changed around it, not because he fixed anything, but because he stayed. One afternoon, at a football awards event in Geneva, Beckham and Ronaldo crossed paths again. It wasn't planned. They hadn't spoken in weeks. Just a nod from across the room. Then, later, in a quiet corridor between meetings, they stood alone. Beckham smiled. Ronaldo raised an eyebrow as if to ask, "All right." Beckham didn't say much. He just leaned slightly, almost joking, still choosing. Ronaldo didn't hesitate. Every day. They shook hands, brief and firm, then turned and walked in different directions. No press, no photos, no interviews, just a moment, a few. Days later, Beckham received a text from a former teammate. "Don't know what you've been doing lately, mate, but you seem different, in a good way." He smiled and locked the phone. That was enough. Victoria was in the next room, asking about dinner plans. He walked over. They decided together. In Liverpool. Ronaldo was reading a bedtime story to his daughters, one of the old ones, with silly rhymes, and a talking goat. His youngest daughter interrupted halfway through. "Baba," she said, looking up at him. "You're always here now," she said. With the simplicity of a child who just understood things in the purest way, Ronaldo paused, unsure how to answer. Then, finally, he said, "I try to be." She nodded, content, her eyes closing once again. Ronaldo kissed her forehead, turned off the lamp, and stepped outside the room. His wife stood in the hallway, leaning against the wall. She smiled at him, not with gratitude, not with surprise, but with the quiet familiarity of someone who had seen him leave and return, without ever stepping out the door. The story never made headlines. There was no podcast, no documentary, just a man who asked for help and another who gave it quietly. No credit claimed, no debt mentioned. But something shifted, something fundamental. One man remembered who he was before the applause. The other remembered why he had survived it. And neither of them ever spoke about it again. Because some things are too sacred for words. So, if one day you notice someone walking a little slower, sitting a little longer at the table, listening more than they speak, maybe they had a conversation that changed them. Maybe they met someone who reminded them of what really matters. Maybe they simply chose again to stay. And maybe that choice was never posted, never filmed, never known by anyone but them. But it saved everything. If this story touched you in any way, don't keep it to yourself. There's always someone who needs to hear it, maybe more than you know. Subscribe to the channel for more stories like this. And let's keep these quiet truths alive. God bless.